everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name's Rachel and this is Stitched Up. Today's video is going to be a review of this, which is my Schnittchen Patterns Silvia Coatigan. So this is the second version of this pattern that I've made. The first one I made about 3 years ago, and there was a few little tweaks that I needed to make to the pattern. And if you remember, those of you that have followed my channel for a while, or at least the last month or so, you'll know that back in, I think it was early December or end of November, I visited my local fabric store, which is called Walton's, and they had this gorgeous Bowden mohair fabric for sale. And I bought 3 meters of it, and yeah, the plan was, as soon as I saw it, that I wanted to make a Coatigan out of it, and I knew that I wanted to revisit the Schnittchen pattern Silvia. Firstly, what is a Coatigan? So a Coatigan obviously is supposed to be in between a coat and a cardigan. So obviously a coat is designed as outerwear, but it's very structured, usually has some tailoring to it of some sort. And obviously cardigan is not designed as outerwear and is usually much less structured, much more casual. So Coatigan falls somewhere in between. So although it's designed as outerwear, it doesn't have all the tailoring aspects that a coat does, which means that usually it's easier to put together and has much more of a casual feel to it. So it's supposed to be quite wearable. And there's a few patterns out there. Ones that I looked at before I actually bought this pattern. I think at the time there was the Jill from Seamwork, but I really like the style of that. But when you actually look at the amount of fabric that it just takes loads of fabric, and I don't understand why. So I haven't bothered with that one. The other one that springs to mind is the Jessie by Sew Over It. But that one seems extremely oversized, and again that put me off that particular pattern. So I'd seen a few versions of this pattern made up and really liked it, so I decided to take the plunge and buy the pattern about 3 years ago. So Schnittchen Patterns are a German pattern company, and they do have some really good designs on their website. Their drafting is excellent, but I would say one of the negatives, if you want to call it a negative, is that their instructions are very brief. So you know, with a lot of indie companies, the instructions are very detailed. Lots of times you've got very clear pictures to help you along. You don't get any of that with Schnittchen Patterns. Basically, with the PDF, which is what I bought, you get 2 sides of A4 with step-by-step instructions, but it's very concise and very to the point. If you think along the lines of Burda, it's not quite as brief as Burda, I will say, but it is again very brief. The translation from German to English on the whole is pretty perfect. It's much better than what my German would be, put it that way. However, there are the odd little comments that just make you sort of scratch your head a little bit, so that's to bear in mind as well. Now, the one positive of the instructions though is they do give you a link to a photo tutorial on their website. So if you go onto the Schnittchen Patterns website, they do have photographic tutorials of lots of their patterns. Unfortunately, the Silvia is one of them. Now, I used that the first time I made this pattern, and I think when I mentioned about making this up back in December, I did say that I hoped that I would find it much easier this time around, mainly because I'm more experienced at sewing. That really wasn't the case, and I still did need to refer to the photo tutorial on the website. Now, what I would say about the photo tutorial, on the whole, it's very helpful, and most of the steps that you possibly would struggle with just from the instructions, you can figure it out from the photo tutorial. However, it starts off where, say, step 1 in the instructions matches photo 1 in the photo tutorial, but as you get further on in the steps, the photographs don't seem to correlate with the steps in the instructions. They seem to be out of sync a little bit, so that's a bit disappointing. And one of the steps, which is where you have to turn up the hem at the bottom, which is obviously one of the last steps, I could not figure it out at all. And I know this had me scratching my head with my original Coatigan a few years ago, but I did work it out then, and this time I just couldn't make head nor tail of it, to be honest, so I ended up doing my own thing with the hem. So I would say that if this is your first attempt at something like this and you've never made anything like this before and you're fairly inexperienced, I wouldn't pick this pattern as your first choice. Having said that, I do love it and I love the finished garment. It's fully lined, so let me show you a little bit more about the actual coat. So basically, you've got this really lovely shawl collar and you've got two pockets on obviously the front, and these are lined as well. So if I just bring it in a little bit closer, hopefully you'll be able to see the lovely lining that I've used on the inside of the pocket there. This shawl collar, just bring it back again, goes obviously all the way around. If I just turn it round, I can show you the back. So you've got a centre back seam here, which to be honest, I'm not really sure why. You could, you know, if you omitted the seam allowance, you could cut this on the fold and omit the back seam. So especially if you were going to use like a patterned fabric, then I think that would obviously, you know, save you having to pattern match. So yeah, so there is a centre back seam and obviously sleeves, two sleeves, which are very important if you have two arms, and it has extra reinforcement in the form of interfacing in the bottom of the hem, the bottom of the sleeves, and obviously in the shawl collar as well. So I'm going to turn the coat inside out and show you what it looks like on the inside. Right, so this is the coat inside out, and as you can see, the facing from the shawl collar comes all the way inside the coat and the lining attaches up to that. So with your pattern pieces, you do get separate pattern pieces for the outer shell of the coat and separate ones for the lining. So all in all, I would say I used just over 2 meters of the outer shell fabric and probably just over 1.5 meters of the lining fabric. This gorgeous lining fabric is a really substantial, high quality lining fabric that I also got from Walton's Fabrics, and I love it. I think it goes great with this coat. I would also say that I obviously did make some adjustments to this pattern. The main adjustments that I made was I added on a good 1.5 inches to the length of the sleeve. I also added on a good 2 inches to the actual length of the coatigan as well. So bear in mind I'm 5'10" and that was necessary for me. So if you're much shorter and you don't need to make those kind of adjustments, you probably wouldn't need so much fabric. Now attaching the lining, if I just turn this around, again the lining has a centre back seam, which is obviously not so important in when it's in the lining, because you know you're not going to see that on the outside, are you? But one unique feature of this pattern when you put it together is normally when you're bagging out a lined coat like this, the gap that you leave unstitched so that you can actually turn it the right way around is usually in the hem. Now it's not the case with this. The gap that you leave is actually in the sleeve, which is here. So you turn the whole garment out through the sleeve lining, and that means that you attach the lining of the sleeves to the outer shell of the sleeves through that hole in the lining fabric of the sleeve hem, if that makes sense. Sleeve, no, it's not the sleeve hem, but you know what I mean, in the sleeve bit here. And that takes a bit of head scratching to make sure that you don't get the lining twisted when you're matching it up to your outer fabric before you're sewing it. So what I did was when it was obviously inside out and I needed to get the lining of the sleeve hem matched up with the lining of the outer shell of the hem on the sleeve, I used a pin to, I pinned where the seam line was on both of those fabrics. And I did that before I actually turned it round, because I remember when I made my first version that I actually got the sleeve totally twisted. So yeah, that's a little bit difficult and a little bit awkward to do it like that, if I'm perfectly honest. I know with Sew Over It, with something I've made of theirs, I can't remember what it was now, I think it was the Coco jacket that's lined. That has, I think it's the hem that is where you have the opening so you can turn it the right way around before you finish it off, and the way that Lisa Comfort tells you to attach the lining to the sleeves is actually much easier. So you know, there's that kind of thing to weigh up as well. So you know, if if you've done enough sewing that you can figure things out for yourself and you can think, actually I know a better way of doing this, then you'll get along fine with this pattern. But as I say, if you're the type of person that needs to read every bit of instruction and you can't figure it out yourself, then you may have difficulty with one or two steps on this jacket. So I've just pointed the camera down a little bit just to show you the hem at the bottom. So what I do love about it is the fact that the lining obviously doesn't hang down below the hem. Sometimes I've found before with some coats, for instance I can't remember what it is now, is it the Victoria Blazer by Hand London? I find that the lining on that hangs down below the outer shell. And that's really frustrating, and you definitely don't want that kind of look. Well, I'm assuming you don't want that kind of look, and I certainly didn't want that with this. So it's great that the lining is sitting nice and flush with the bottom of the hem, but as I say, I did have a bit of a difficulty with the instructions for this because the outer shell fabric is stepped at the lining and I could not figure out how that was supposed to attach, so I just ended up doing my own thing, and it's worked out absolutely fine. So yeah, so that's really it. So what can I tell you about this kind of fabric? This is the first time that I've used any fabric like this, anything that's sort of faux fur-ish. And all that I would say as well is, remember, this has a nap, very much like velvet. I mean, it's short pile, but obviously I needed to make sure that the nap ran the same direction on every pattern piece that I cut out. So I still only use just over 2 meters of fabric, so that just tells you, you know, how sort of it's not a fabric hungry jacket really. And yeah, I wanted to make sure that the pile ran downwards rather than the other way, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's just something to be careful of if you are going to use a fabric that has a nap. But all in all, I do love it. I do really love it, but I don't think it's the best pattern if you're fairly inexperienced. I mean, even with my experience, and I don't class myself as experienced because I've only been sewing just coming up to 6 years now, and but even with the experience that I do have, I did have a couple of head scratching moments with this. Having said that, I would definitely make it again. I mean, I have made it again because this is my second one, and I do think that I will probably make it again as well, because I love the style of it. The big shawl collar is very easy to do, but I just think the instructions could be a little bit clearer. That's my main complaint. So, but as regards the finished item, how it fits, I've worn this loads already, and yeah, I can see myself definitely making more. Yes, if you do have any questions, please feel free to leave them below. I am planning on trying to ensure that I answer all questions on any of my pattern reviews, in case there's anything you want to ask that I've not covered in this vlog. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that, and I will look forward to seeing you again really soon. Take care, bye.